Hi everyone, I hope you're doing well today. We're glad to have you with us for this 1 hour discussion on immersive technologies and the role they can play in shaping our future. Hopefully a more inclusive future. I'm Anissa, I'm the head of media programs at Sparknews. Just a few words on Sparknews. We are a B Corp French company focusing on the transformative power of narratives to accelerate the ecological and social transition in all sectors of society. We organizing this online discussion to spark conversation as we're currently part of a large consortium of 19 organizations called TRANSMIXR, funded by the European Union to research and imagine new consumption habits of immersive text in the media and cultural sector. Immersive technologies have been the talk of the town, a topic of discussion in recent years, and many are predicting that they will have a significant impact on our societies. I think we can all agree to say that we are at that sweet spot, the one where these technologies have not fully been adopted, that perfect moment to make sure that all sectors of this industry are going in the right direction. Today, we wanted to discuss if and how they could be an opportunity for social change and a more gender-balanced world. Before I invite our wonderful speakers on stage, I just wanted to take a few seconds to remind ourselves that gender equality is growing more distant than ever. And according to the UN, it will take almost 300 years to achieve gender equality globally. And yet, in parallel, 54% of the population believes that we've gone far enough for gender, that we've talked about this topic, and it's time to move on, kind of. The insights and experience of our three speakers will definitely help us to try best to understand where we're heading, but also what could be done to ensure that these new technologies help us better understand each other's perspectives and realities, and perhaps shift this narrative dissonance that I was just referring to. We'll, of course, save some time at the end for the question. If you're not yet familiarized with Livestorm, you have on the right side of the screen a chat and question section, so feel free to ask. Kayla from Spark News will be there to chat with you guys and moderate the session. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speakers. I'll start with Dr. Sarah Atkinson, Professor of Screen Media at King's College. Archer Trust, one of the co-founder of Be Another Lab, a research lab working at the intersection of art, science, and technology. And Laura Virup, program manager and XR strategist at Cora, a VR and AR production studio based in Copenhagen. Hi, Sarah. Hi, Arthur.
Hi.
Hi, Laura. Thank you all three for being with us today. We're very glad to have you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Sarah, I'm turning to you first. How about we start the conversation with the common understanding of what is actually behind the word immersive technologies?
Yeah, good question. So yeah, they encompass a spectrum, I would say, that span the purely virtual, the purely digital, to the wholly physical. So when we think of immersive reality, sometimes if you type that in a search engine, you'll come up with a very well familiar image of a virtual reality headset, someone wearing something that's closed off their entire world outside them, and they're immersed in an entirely virtual world that surrounds them. There's also augmented reality, which lets in aspects of the digital world, the physical world. It overlays the digital onto the physical, so that's a kind of hybrid. And then you can move into major immersive spaces that are domes that have projections and lighting, and then it can all be augmented with haptic technology, sensor technology. There's immersive audio, spatialized audio. There's a whole suite of technologies used to embody the person within a virtual space. So I'd say that's the key thing. It's an embodied form of technology, an embodied form of experience that can take place in a physical environment, or it could be in an online virtual world that's set up by a real-time game engine. So yeah, it's very broad, but I think that's the key component of it. It's about immersing a person in a space, transporting them to somewhere different.
Very broad, very complex, and very new. So that's why I thought it might be interesting to start with a definition. I know that we have some people working in the tech industry that are connecting, but just in case we also have a wider audience, might be great to just make sure that everyone understands immersive technologies. What's really interesting with you, Sarah, is that you've been studying this sector, but also working on concrete projects for many, many years now. And I wanted to kind of ask you to start up the conversation based on your own experience and your perspective as a scholar. Has the sector started already to contribute to any kind of narrative changes?
Yeah, another good question. So I think in my own research, I've always studied new areas where new emerging technologies are introduced into society and what happens during that moment. And it's at the same point where new media comes in to society that you get lots of people participating because there's a democratizing aspect. So there's accessibility to the tools. So you find that there's lots of women, lots of people with marginalized identities who come into these spaces because they can experiment, they can play, and they can practice in quite an open environment. But very soon after that, when it becomes commercialized, when there's money to be invested, all of those original people who are in there innovating can tend to get locked out because investment tends to go to people who look like the investors, which is, we know, is white men. So that then takes over the narrative and you lose that opportunity. So I see immersive technology as being a space like this at the moment, where there's lots of opportunities, lots of different people experimenting, using the technology for what it's best at, which is to bring new stories, new subjectivities, a diverse range of perspectives, and opening that up to new audiences. So a really kind of huge potential here. And again, it's all about that embodiment, the idea that you can put someone in a place and that can start to change their perception. It can start to open their mind. It can start to reveal worlds and experiences and people they never would see in their daily lives. So there's so much potential and untapped potential, I would say, at the moment.
We'll definitely go back to equal representation in the tech sector at a later point during our conversation. But now that we started talking about production and new narratives, I thought it might be also great to give a chance to Arthur and Laura to introduce themselves and also their company. You guys have two different approaches that I'm sure our audience will find very complementary. So it's really glad to have you both on stage. Maybe we can start with Laura. Can you tell us more about Cora?
Certainly. Thank you, Anissa. And yeah, my name is Laura. I work at Cora as a program manager for European innovation projects. And to start with Cora and what it is, I want to relate back to our name. Our name is a concept derived from Plato, Cora being the space between the real and the non-real that wavers what we can sense and what is yet to be. And Cora, in the most simple of terms, is an augmented and virtual production studio based in Copenhagen, Denmark. Since about 2015, we've been pioneering partnerships and experiences in XR together with partners and clients, as well as public institutions, to really try to push the boundaries of what XR can do, and always seeking to innovate new use cases and extend the application areas of the technology across various sectors. So we work with everything from psychiatric experts to conduct avatar therapy and help patients with schizophrenia, to pioneer new educational initiatives, produce and distribute artworks and cultural projects. And the key for us is really to democratize XR and move away from the technology and look more at what the technology can do and how it can touch people. So with that, we have an open door policy to our office, as well as a workshop space dedicated to invite people to try and feel and engage with the media. And so we really try to demystify and exemplify with real cases what XR is and how it can be beneficial for people and the planet.
Any projects that you've done in the past few years that you want to highlight, maybe, Laura?
I think for the topic of this discussion, I really want to emphasize a project called With These Hands, which is a project that is specifically dedicated to putting people in the hands of rape survivors and people that have experienced sexual violence. And why this project is interesting is really because you go into an experience where you're going to listen to a story, and by embodying the hands of the survivor, you decide yourself when you want to pause and when you want to listen and when you want to take the story to the next chapter. And by putting people in both the position of the person that is speaking, but also where you are in a position where you can manage the story itself, makes the spectator and the listener more attentive to the details, because you're not only consuming a story, but you're actively participating and engaging in the content. And this is something I think where XR is particularly interesting for narratives and shaping people's behavior in relation to the stories we listen to.
Arthur, what about Be Another Lab? How was it was created? It's a collective, so it's kind of different also from maybe the way Cora was first created. So it's just interesting to kind of see how you started from the research into the production side of this interesting machine.
Absolutely, yeah, thank you. So my name is Arthur. I am a co-founder of Be Another Lab. We started around 2013. It was just at the onset of this new VR wave, just before the Oculus Rift came out, and we come from a really do-it-yourself ethos of just tinkering, and not necessarily everybody coming from a technical background. Was very diverse background in terms of specialties, skills, but also geographical nationalities. And we met in Barcelona during our studies at the Pompeu Fabra University, and so more people were added to the collective progressively, but the original idea was sparked by Philippe Bertrand, who's a French-Brazilian artist and researcher, now living in Brazil, that was really inspired by the embodiment neuroscience experiment that were happening at places like Ershan Lab in Sweden, and also Malflater's Lab in Barcelona, which have been the pioneers in this scientific approach to embodiment. And really the idea was to copy those setups from neuroscience and use those as tools for performative installations that will be co-created with participants who are willing to share a personal story that can be experienced from the first-person perspective. Everything in real time. It was very ambitious from the onset, and we came to be known by the gender swap video, which was another iteration of this process. But the interesting thing about this whole genesis is that this project was just an experiment that we made that we hadn't shared with anyone, and somehow it became to spread on the internet. And now we were invited everywhere all around the planet to show something that barely exists. But it gave us the opportunity to hone our skills in terms of being very reactive and able to improvise and kind of really do what we have in the moment, which is something that we always strive to do. And so it really helps open to collaboration, co-creation with people, and really putting a focus on the physical environment. So we can use props, spaces, stories from people actually there, and with hopefully the possibility to impact the local context every time we are invited somewhere. So it's an immersive process for us also to get into different contexts and try not to bring our own narratives, but to try to start from people's experiences is how we do. And so this art research also led us into getting back into scientific research. So in the process, 2 of the members got a PhD in neuroscience, and I'm also working in a neuroscience lab as an engineer currently. And so we have, through this, we're able to also, through this, open process of artistic experimentation, develop techniques that work really well through our experience, but also help us maybe ask better questions and not just be interested in the scientific verification of anything, but try to ask relevant questions.
And you kind of got put on the map with your gender swap project.
Mm-hmm.
Can you maybe tell us a bit more about how it's interesting to use both the immersive and the kind of reality to help people understand each other's reality differently.
So yeah, I mean, it started as this exploration on mutual respect. So there is so it's an experiment that we haven't replicated so much, actually, because obviously we're showing it in public context, and we invite people from the public to actually engage in the swap. So in that case, people were almost naked, so there was this really intimate connection that we strive to create, and to explore this idea of consent and mutual respect, where the trick is being that since you are both seeing through the perspective of the other person in real time, your embodiment is only going to work as long as you're doing the same movements, you're in perfect synchrony. And the more in synchrony you are, the more you will be engaging your sense of proprioception, your visual, and your kind of really close attention to where the movement is going. So really guessing where the other person is ready to go, comfortable to go, willing to go, and this experiencing this shared agency. Yes, so that's so this say feminist approach we had from the beginning. We had also the opportunity to apply this to other contexts with other performers dealing with whether it's war trauma or the experience of changing gender assignation, transgender men, women, and that sort of things. But it's very wider than this, really. It's because it allows to address so many issues.
It kind of ties in with the question that we discussed all three quite extensively is, yes, it does create emotion and empathy, hopefully. Where does it go? Does it actually go to having a sense of responsibility and changes in our behaviors? That's the big question. And I kind of want to turn to you, Sarah, to kind of start with this.
Yeah, so when we talked about it, we talked about earlier projects where this sort of experimentation began, and this awareness that virtual reality and immersive technologies could engender a sense of empathy. And I pointed to one particular project that some of you may be aware of, which was by Noni de la Peña, an artist who produced a piece called Hunger in LA, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival in 2012. And it was actually a piece that was notable for a number of reasons, one of them being that it was the project that actually then propelled the Oculus Rift into being, because they used a prototype for that experience, because they needed something that was portable so that the wearer could actually move around and look in the virtual space. And it was based on, it used animated figures and real audio that was taken from a food bank experience in downtown LA. And it was really a kind of a comment and an insight into hunger and the healthcare system in the USA at the time. So it was a kind of a project that really started to talk about empathy and what it would feel like to be in a situation like that, where a person collapses in front of you through hunger, queuing for a food bank. And it was from that Noni de la Peña coined the term immersive journalism, and then went on to produce lots of different projects and still does in that area. So taking journalistic scenarios into immersive settings with, exactly what we've been talking about in the projects that Laura and Arthur have talked about, that they've produced, that then, because you're in that subjectivity, because you're embodied, it opens up a whole new way to understand a person's experience and a person's subjectivity. But yeah, it's how far does empathy go? Can you be truly empathetic in those situations? It's a fine line to tread, but certainly there's, compassion and understanding that it can absolutely evoke in users who experience these pieces.
Have you been able, Arthur, to kind of track and measure those kinds of impacts during certain experiences that you had with the Be Another Lab machine?
Yeah, so we've at the beginning, I think, we started doing some studies. We have one publication where we that we made, but that our collaborator Mark Teruel, also co-founder, made with the story we recorded with Jonah, a transgender man from the Netherlands, and we have been basically doing data collection at the museum. So and more we are integrating questionnaires and try to integrate scientific research in our artistic context, where we have the ability to get a lot of participants in our experiments. And so it's going to be either some questionnaires or tracking, because we want to be able to measure implicit and also objective reactions through movements and that kind of thing. I would say we're really at the beginning of this. And I think the most important question is the long-term potential, right? That nobody has any idea of, right? Because it's so new. At least this democratization is so new. So I think it really prompts us to be prudent and responsible with what we aim to achieve. But I think, yeah, this is definitely the direction that we're trying to go towards.
Laura, empathy, responsibility, can the immersive experience help?
Yeah, I think, first of all, we need to look at how these concepts are being connected. For instance, if we look at change management, it always starts by creating accountability and this sense of obligation that makes people feel compelled to change and willing to take action. But only putting pressure on people don't really work. And I think we all know that, and we see it also in the narratives pushed on the climate agenda and the whole ecological crisis, that, well, we need to do something and it's your responsibility. And I think this is where we need empathy, and where empathy can come in to give responsibility, action, and agency. And I think there's always a reason for people's resistance to change. And if we really want to move people and ourselves, we must find out what that underlying reason is. And there we found that empathy, by putting oneself in someone else's shoes, can really be a way to find out what's going on. And that is hugely important in order to generate action. So I think for more structural issues, XR has a huge role to play there, as we suddenly can put ourselves in someone else's shoes and not only be somewhere else, but also become someone else. And this somatic power of a medium will have an impact on responsibility if we can manage to connect these two together.
So it's not just about the type of story that we tell, but it's also how we tell it. And how we use those technologies. And Arthur, during our discussion, you were mentioning also the fact that it's not just about the technology itself, but it's what surrounds it. So you use a lot of sensory aspects during the Be Another Lab experiences, and I thought that it might be great to also share that to our audience.
Yes, absolutely. So, I mean, I always say that what is important is not what happens when you have the headset on, when you remove it, because our goal is really to spark a conversation, to your interest, to see how a conversation can be changed based on that experience, and also, yes, so the technology always acts as some kind of filter. It limits what we can do. Also, it inspires us, of course, and it opens possibilities, but it has its own agency, especially with, so for us, the acquisition of Oculus Rift by Meta was a drawback to us. It more and more locked us into a proprietary system and limited us for experimentation. This kind of context, this kind of agency of technology is important to take into account. And so we try to, yes, always start from also obviously, so now we have, the new Apple headset that is promising us to include more and more of their surroundings in the experience. And for us from the beginning, virtual reality had this really dangerous potential for isolation. And so we try that's a reason for us to try to move away as much as possible from 3D graphics, virtual environment, and try to always bring the reality that surrounds us using film and real-time video. And and the idea is to also try to have people appropriate the technology, the systems, the practices, and so we work as much as we produce pieces as much as we encourage people to make their own pieces and take them further and have this really open and collaborative approach where all our systems are open source and free to use for everyone, as long as it's for a non-commercial application. And try to build it together to give it away, and hopefully get some back in return in terms of experience and new possibilities and improvements to the experience.
So not just pushing one story to someone, but trying to co-construct a story, let someone tell their own story, which is kind of also different to a lot of usage that we've seen in the past few years, talking about the United Nations and some of the videos that they did on refugee camps. Yes, you all kind of said that, yes, it's interesting to see, but does it actually change our perspective? We're not sure yet, because it seems so far. And it was also kind of your point, Sarah, during the discussion.
Yeah, thinking about the co-creation aspect that Arthur's touched on, I think that's really important. And there's one project that I'd point to where that was central, which is an XR project called Brianna's Garden, which is both augmented reality and virtual reality. It was a project by an artist called Lady Phoenix, and it was based on the Breonna Taylor killing. She was shot and killed by the police when they illegally entered her home in 2020. But what the project did was to develop a space for healing, collaborating with Breonna Taylor's family and many other artists to create these beautiful kind of garden landscapes that you would experience in both virtual reality and augmented reality, where flowers would literally kind of grow and bloom, blossom from the ground. But what was key to that, of course, was the co-creation, and that was the piece to tell Brianna's story that her family wanted to tell.
So we've talked a lot about content production and the type of content that's being produced. We haven't yet discussed about who's producing the content. And it's something that you kind of touched upon, Sarah, at the beginning of your conversation. You've been following trends for many years. Have you seen any types of changes into gender-based representation in the tech and more specifically in the immersive technology sector?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've seen a trend towards many women and, as I mentioned before, those with marginalized identities excelling in this space, seeing this as an opportunity where they belong, they can tell, new stories, share new perspectives. But that tends to kind of go under the radar as things develop and as more dominant narratives kind of take over. So absolutely, the women are present when we talk about gender diversity, but are they, accurately represented in the press and in the histories that are written? Absolutely not. That challenge still persists, that we don't see them in a way that we might see other figures in the tech and in immersive sectors. So I think it's been since the pandemic, the amount of venture capital funding has dropped. I think it was a terrible figure anyway. I think it was 3% or 3 pence per pound in the UK went to women founders. I think it's now dropped to 2%. So the challenges are, very much there. So yes, it's being made and innovated by different people, but the investment and the development is very, very narrow still, we see.
You were part of a project, and you're part of a project that's actually focusing on those types of issues, a vision for women in VR. That would be interesting to also maybe share the different insights.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that was in around 2017 where we'd identified this, the kind of the explosion of people who were working in this. It seemed a very diverse and inclusive and exciting space. So we brought together 20 of those women from the UK and Europe together to actually interrogate that. Is this an open, inclusive space? How is it going to develop as positively as it can do? Because we all saw the opportunity there, that this is a new area. It hasn't yet been tainted by the bigger industries where there's endemic problems, of gender inequality and inequalities of all kinds, and the extreme nature of that in terms of harassment that was being experienced in the games industry. So yeah, really wanted to understand this new space of innovation. Could it be different? And people already saying, the same kind of challenges and problems are creeping in with that lack of representation, that lack of inequality, pointing to things like the equipment and the hardware, for example, being made for a certain type of body. It didn't fit women, or it didn't fit people who weren't able-bodied, had a different kind of head shape. It was all kind of built around a particular model, which was, a male figure. So all of those kind of embedded inequalities that creep through in the algorithms, in the tech design, were there. So the vision for women in VR was written by those women to say, let's change this, now from the get-go, make this a gender equal space, and with various recommendations and things that were, you know, directed at the other companies and the outer world to say, let's kind of, not make the same mistakes that have been made repeatedly in the past.
Because it's about the technology itself, but it's about also the perspective that you share to your audience. And it's what we're trying to get more people on board that are having different experiences of life, to make sure that the content that we're producing is actually a reflection of our own societies. And I wanted to turn to Cora and to be in other lab to kind of see how are you guys doing in terms of gender equality. Cora, are you 50-50?
We are actually, and we're super
Really?
proud. And we're almost, I think from next week, we're going to be above the 50-50 with a larger representation of women. So I think, you know, it's also strange to say we're proud, because it should be a no-brainer, right? But in theory, it's not, because we're working still in a quite male-dominated industry, and especially in terms of programmers, we see a lack in gender representation, and I mean, it's something that the whole sector is struggling with. So we also struggle. But in terms of how we work with it, I think we have kept a focus on what we can control as a production company, because we work with clients, and sometimes what our clients do is a little bit outside our hands. But what we can focus on is really the diversity and everything within our control, such as our hiring processes, implementing gender policies, issuing education and tools for learning how to speak about diversity and inclusion. Also, we send out surveys to our staff in case they see anything or want to report anything anonymously, to take the temperature and discover if there are any incidents that go unnoticed. And we really encourage taking action on any kind of discriminatory behavior.
Oh, this goes.
And then I think on a broader level, in order to, again, come back to the industry, we're trying to engage our communities, and we are the driver of, or the leader of, the Danish community for women in immersive tech. And we've seen on these events that we arrange for women in the industry that the interest is huge. And just the fact that you can mirror yourself in people doing similar stuff as you do and being engaged in the industry as a woman has been tremendously impactful for everybody that is engaged. And I think really coming back to the fact that the tech is just a tool, and it shouldn't scare people away from producing content and sharing their stories. So we really try to be active in this communication and encourage also applicants from not only all genders, but all kinds of spectra that apply to us and really contribute with their perspectives, because it's needed, and it's really needed at this point in time where XR is still in the infant stages, and we have so much also powers in a way as producers to make sure that what comes out there is representative and is reflecting a reality for all.
And I think you also went a bit further and put in place a gender policy.
Yeah, we did, and it was not really because I don't want to say because it was needed, but because it was sought after, but we wanted to stay a little bit on the forefront ourselves and see if there are any gaps that there's also, even regardless of how aware or try to be as mindful as possible you do have blind spots, and these policies and frequencies of following up and surveying how is it going can really be helpful for managers and staff alike to be more to be reflecting more and to be more aware of what's going on in the company. And I think policy, you can say a lot of things about policies and how well they are being implemented and enforced, but what they do is really to make sure that there is a stance being taken and that it's available, and there's some core definitions that have been made around certain words that can mean so many things to different people, and just creating this common vocabulary around topics that are so relevant and so debatable for many people is really important. And I think that is what policy really can do to make sure it's available and cohesive.
Arthur, 50-50 as well?
No, unfortunately, not at all. We should be doing much better in that regard. Yes. Yeah, I mean, we have a very different approach because we work also very differently. We're a collective, we're a non-profit organization, and we're completely horizontal. So all the decisions that we take are made by consensus, and especially in the genesis of the entity, it has been subject of endless debates. It took us a while to find our identity, and it was also we struggled a lot basically with it, and for all sorts of topics related to gender or national identity or origin or social status or economic expectations. Of course, some people wanted to go more for the commercial route. Other people were. So we have also in that sense a diversity of not just of how we identify, but like how we what the project means to us. And so it's in that sense it's really a struggle. And yeah, we tend to work by consensus, also encourage personal initiative, and taking responsibility for the initiatives. So in that sense, the advantage is that we're very fluid in terms of the roles in the organization, and we have very, very little hierarchy, but also we are very small. We're under 10 people working in it. The way I like to think is we move a bit between the cracks, also in terms of disciplines, in terms of institutions. So we don't really have the capacity to enforce policies but we instead it's more like of a culture of dialogue and kind of trying to respect other people's limits in terms of what they're able to commit to, what they feel comfortable with. Some projects, some clients, some of us might not be interested in working with or have reservations, ethical reservations of working with. So yeah, and I think our role, like as we project ourselves, maybe as artists, is not so much to create guidelines for policies or for governance, but rather to do our best at foster better conversations and try to keep the outcome open. That's always how we've worked, and it's a little bit precarious and uncertain. So yeah, in terms of gender balance in our team, it's maybe 7-3 or something like this. So it's definitely could be better. Lately, we have Norma, our an anthropologist within the team that's been taking more and more initiatives. So we're really happy about that. But for her, it's been like being in a team for a long time. In the beginning, it was very, very hard in the beginning. And yeah, I think we could have done better in I wouldn't say including us, but including her, but supporting her in terms of giving her space to take her own initiatives. And maybe it was not clear to us, and we could have maybe just let her more time to express what her goals were. But in the end, those conversations or this kind of long process is bearing its fruit, I think. So yeah.
So it's not just about equal representation, but it's also about internal culture and how you address those different biases and being aware of your own limits.
Yeah, and mostly I would say in terms of hierarchies, because I think it's also natural to have gender imbalance in certain fields. It's something that we cannot have 50% of every gender in every profession. I think there's been natural tendencies towards certain occupations and roles, but it's more for us a question of hierarchy, is that we tend to, and it's something we apply to everything, the hierarchies between different fields of knowledge, between different cultures. So we want to make sure there is no, for example, that technology or computer science is not, or the constraints that are imposed by technology are not something that is more important than getting people's perspective, than to get to have a positive impact on people's lives, and yeah, any kind of topic that you would like to include in the conversation. I think it's important to maintain a balance and try to flatten hierarchies. That's a bit of our approach.
There are so many questions on the chat that I kind of pose my own questions and start asking to you guys some of the questions from our audience. It's really open mic, so if there's any one of you three that want to jump in and answer the first question, I'll turn to Eli. Is there a danger that VR experiences around the world on things like hunger that are designed to invoke empathy in the user are veering closely into virtual poverty tourism? I think it's a question that comes in a lot of communication sector.
Yeah, I can go first. And I think this is so relevant because as any other, as you say, and it's a communications and content producing task, we are also as producers and creators somewhat responsible to incorporate perspectives and not talk on behalf of someone else. And I think the stories that are being shared is really important, that these stories come from the people that have experienced it themselves and not an interpretation of reality. And I think one way to go about it in VR, especially when we talk about social issues, is always to work either in partnerships with the people that have regular touch points, with people concerned of the stories you're trying to share, or co-create with the users and include perspectives from those that you are trying to give mandate and speak on behalf of, because we can make all kinds of interpretations and create content, but in these kind of issues that are related to social structural issues, we need to make sure that it's representative. And I think that's where we as producers have a responsibility to incorporate perspectives.
Sarah, does that resonate with some of your research and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. Really agree with what Laura said there. And there was a dangerous time when VR first came on and it was heralded as the empathy machine, that all of these projects started to emerge, which is absolutely about that point of poverty porn. You know, they were kind of sensationalizing people's situations, and they were from the perspective of the makers and not those who were the subjects. So reversing that in the way that Laura describes is absolutely, what should be happening. I mean, it got kind of so extreme. I think there was a project in 2016 called I Animal, which gave you the perspective of an animal in captivity. You know, it's going to all of those sorts of extremes, or you can empathize with anything if you're just put in that place. But of course, you cannot. It is far more complex than that. So I think thinking around these ideas, of co-creation, of community production, working with those whose story that you want to tell, or indeed enabling them to tell their own story with the equipment and the resources and the education that they need to do that themselves independently, is even better.
There's a question that I want to ask following, because it really resonates with what you just said. How do we safeguard truth and guarantee against deception in this whole new augmented reality age? Are there parameters that are already set?
Yeah, it's augmented reality and it's artificial intelligence, isn't it? It's the latest debate and the latest challenge, and it is a work in progress. I would say this is a challenge for all of those who work within this, who are governing this, who are trying to build policy around it, because it's moved so fast, as we've seen, you know, in the media, the responses that have been made. So yeah, invite others to kind of perhaps speak a bit more to that too.
Parameters, Arthur and Laura, that you put yourselves internally, maybe?
I don't know. It's a very tricky question. I I feel very reluctant to offer like a clear answer. I think the way I see it is a responsibility of journalists, right? I think this is more in terms of journalism. I don't think this is our role as artists or maybe documentary makers. Somehow there is this connection to journalism. I really don't know what to say. I'm not sure. I'm not sure the technology is making so much of a difference, because it's about the work of journalism, the verification of crossing sources, and I think I guess maybe one of the things that the question is referring to is things like deepfakes and the possibility to create fake videos like that. I don't know. Maybe it's because I'm a bit familiarized with the technology itself that I found it kind of instinctively maybe easy to detect. Maybe it's not the case for many people, but for me the issue is more the question of kind of our hacking of attention by social media companies, and how it's geared toward conflict, because this is the best way to generate attention and profit in the short term. And AI, and I don't know, maybe the person can add more details to the question, but this is my personal answer.
Yeah. No, I tend to agree with the previous speakers. I think it's a very common question when you speak about content creation in general and journalism and media as a sector. What is truth? Is there one truth or is there many truths? And what is interpretation versus reality? And this, I want to take the discussion from what we have been experiencing as a two-dimensional information-based way of consuming media. Now we're moving into the three-dimensional space and a spatial experience of consuming media. And I think this is only the beginning, and we can also see in debates on AI and when you generate content, like who owns the content, who is the original creator. And I think in this case, where we also start to move more three-dimensional, it will be somewhat very hard to point to one truth and one creator. And I think this is a question that has to be dealt with with a larger, let's say, with a larger lens. This is really where we're going in the future, towards how we consume and produce media experiences. Something I am very mindful of, and also when we speak about VR, is how VR is still not really accessible for everyone. And there's a huge issue in terms of accessibility because we depend on a hardware that is not rolled out on a broad scale. So that also includes like who decides what truth and who is the sole creators. It's also a very slim part of the population right now that is producing and consuming XR. So I think one of the questions, and I could see it somewhere in the chat, that was related to how hardware is still a huge issue. And I usually say, when we speak to clients and partners alike, for every pound you spend on hardware and software, you need at least 2 more for change management to do guidelines, training, support, and implementation. And I think that is also what we're going to see when we start to talk about who owns what. It's like that there's so much heavy investment in making this accessible. So that is still a hurdle. And I think until we can make it accessible, we cannot completely say what truth is, if that makes sense.
We might not be able to say what truth is, but we can make sure that we are based on facts and actual figures and real data. And that's something that we should all be mindful of. Kind of tying into what you just said, Laura, Matej had a question of kind of related to his work as a journalist. And he wanted to know if you all had XR storytelling advice from newsrooms. What will work and what will not? Where should we seek opportunities for immersive stories? Again, open question. But I know you all have something to say on the work of the media.
I think as a starting point, we always talk about why immersion. Like, why are we telling a story using 3D rather than just telling a story using any other media? And I think for a newsroom, what will work and what will not is really up to who you're talking to, because XR for now is a bespoke medium more than a mass medium. And if you want to touch people deeply and you want to create a VR, let's just assume it's a VR experience, it will still be, at this point in time, a rather isolated experience for one user. So I think when you look at what work and what will not, is really to ask yourself, who am I producing content for, and why would immersion make sense? Maybe it makes sense because you touch upon perspective shifting. Maybe you want to use immersion because you want to simulate something or visualize something that is completely unimaginable, or something that you try to convey that is simply too hard to convey in words. So you need imagery that is so out of the box. And there we have a superpower in VR, because you can start to take people to the inaccessible, dreamy places that we still can't discover. So I think it's really always to come back to the audience and what makes sense for people consuming content.
Sarah, maybe on the role of the media and going back to gender equality, do you see any space for those new immersive technologies?
Well, yeah, absolutely. In terms of the role of the media, it points to the representation question that we've come back to, which is around people being able to see themselves in this space, to then be able to project themselves, to have a career in that space, to participate, to be included. And that is still a very limiting lens if you do kind of image searches and you connect gender to that. If you do women in VR, you will end up with something very different to if you type in men in VR, who might well be operating and innovating, but the women are very often then the subjects or the kind of the marketing mechanism that's used to sell these products. And it happens at tech events time and time again. It's the images that people see are those then that carried forward in educational contexts where children are looking at what they might do in the future. They need to see themselves in the media, they need to be represented, and that's across gender and that's across all identities. It all goes back to diversity and diversity of teams and diversity in the workforce, in the workplace, so that talking about kind of Arthur's distributed decision making, if you've got a diverse range of perspectives in that, then that model is really successful because it will bring in all of those different viewpoints to make a decision that's informed by diversity. So I kind of invite people to do this circle of trust exercise, as a thought experiment. If you think about the 4 people who you trust the most in the world with your work, with your life, with your secrets, write down all of their personal characteristics and what they look like and who they are, and then see how different they are to you. And then kind of maybe question that. If they all look the same as you, then maybe you need to think about expanding your own circle of trust to include people that will be different to you, people that will challenge you, people that will take you in new directions in a way that people who just look and sound like you are probably going to say the same thing that you're going to say. So yeah, that would be my kind of point to make around that.
Arthur, you also said when we were discussing that, yes, there might be opportunities for immersive text in the media sector, but do we really want to have a future where we're actually using those technologies every single day to inform ourselves? I think you're still muted, Arthur.
Oops, yes, sorry. Yeah, I mean, it's an open question. I don't know how invasive this technology will become, in the sense of being close to our body and tracking us constantly, and being just a tool for more data extraction and extractivism in general. Yeah, the way we approach it is, yeah, our hypothesis. Let's say I'm going to schematize a little bit how we think of the experience of how, and also that will tie in maybe some advices from our experience to XR creators. I think what we bring that is very special is also this sort of ceremonial aspect, and we put a lot of emphasis in how people are eased in and out of the experience. Make sure we check expectations. We tell them that they can stop the experience as soon as they feel uncomfortable. That's that, and we have maybe make a case for sort of techno shamanism, right? What we're proposing is very much a psychedelic experience, right? So there's this whole human connection aspect, not just during the experience, but after, before, and trying to worry about the long-term consequences. And this is, I think, how people remember us best, and that's just how we had people that told us that this changed their life, and they always think about us. So after they've tried it, and maybe some 5 years after we had a random demo at some random event, we don't really know also what state of mind people come with, because it's festivals or something like that, and people go through very quickly, and then 5 years after they bring us to their context and they invite us and they want to do more things with us. So yeah, this kind of like using this to meet people, like really meet people, whether it's when you're showing the work or sorry, I diverge a bit from the original question, but to say that, yeah, I think I definitely wouldn't feel, I don't use VR in my everyday life at all, and I don't really like to. I just use it for testing something quickly when I'm developing or I'm showing it to people, and that's it. And I think this kind of maybe life-changing event once in a while, or maybe on a regular basis, but like maybe once a week or something like that, for all the therapeutic applications, I think this is really, really, really promising. I definitely feel very uncomfortable with the this never-ending invasion of our privacy, and with companies like Meta and so on, and they are the one driving the market. They're also failing really hard with Meta. I mean, at least the metaverse. So let's see how it evolves.
Well, Naya from the TRANSMIXR consortium kind of had a question on that. I think the conversation on media and XR is sparking questions for our audience. Do the panel think that news media stories of the future will be metaverse dominated, if they're where people will go for more detailed and personalized news media experience? I think that Arthur already gave his answer. I don't know if Sarah or Laura, you want to jump in.
Sure. I think the metaverse is one of these concepts that no one, like everybody talks about it, but no one knows what it is. And I think seeing the metaverse as a way of experience internet in 3D, yes, this is, of course, a place where news and media stories will be taking place. If we see the metaverse as something that Meta owns and is driven by, just given the user numbers and the people currently being there and hanging out there, I don't think so. That's my personal opinion. I think what we're looking at is also a news and media story development that is driven by a plurality of creators rather than the big broadcasters and media agents. And still, I think we have a long way to go in terms of working with partners. And when we work with corporate clients, they say XR is a nice to have, but it's hard to measure. And the educational and cultural institutions are really keen and brave to test, but they think it's too inaccessible. So I think given the media industry, probably somewhat similar arguments are being told there, that it's interesting, but it's hard to see how it's going to be implemented. And I think what we can do as producers and experts on the topic is really to carve out the different ways that you can start engaging with the medium and getting it closer to you and becoming part of this rather than being a spectator of this evolution.
If we ever get to a future where the metaverse is where we get the news, I kind of sense that will need to drive a lot of resources on change management in a lot of newsrooms around the world before we get to that. So I think we're safe for the moment. But Sarah, did you want to jump in as well?
Yeah, I mean, just to say, Laura said it really, that it's about plurality. So there'll never be one metaverse, and hopefully not Meta's version of it. There'll be a multitude of metaverses, again, yeah, to represent the plurality of perspectives and lived experience.
So we kind of nearing the end of our discussion. I know that we have a lot of other questions that we haven't been able to answer, but what I could do perhaps is make sure that I'm connecting people that want to follow up questions with Sarah, Laura, and Arthur directly by email, so you guys can chat. But before we close this conversation, I wanted to turn to all three of you and maybe ask you if you had a call to action, if there was one thing that you wanted to say to the people from the sector that are listening to you today on the role of immersive technologies in shaping a more inclusive and gender balanced future, what would you want to say? I'm gonna give the mic to Sarah to start.
I think I said it in one of my last answers, which was about diversifying your teams, the people that you work with, the people that you associate with, the companies that you lead, the teams that you lead. Bring in new voices, people that will challenge you, that are different to you, and yeah, that would be my takeaway.
Laura.
Definitely include representation, and do that by working in partnerships with those who have regular touch points with audiences and can bring stories to life, and also dare to hire someone that have a different perspective than you, because I swear it will bring very good results.
Arthur?
I don't know what to say. I just have this one thing stuck in my mind is meet people. Try to meet people where they are, whether it's who you're producing with or who you're producing for. Yeah, you know, it's an embodied medium, and it's something that is still, you know, it's not something that people have at home so much anymore. So you'll be showing it at fairs, you're showing it at events, at festivals. So you should we're still at the point where we have this opportunity to meet the people that are viewing our media, experiencing our media, and I think it's very important to interact with them after the experience, before. And there's all this body language in VR that you can observe when you're watching people participating, and I think it's for us it's been really useful to observe. So I would say try to focus on that.
So what I've tried to take a few notes to make sure that we're all leaving the conversation with a few words to think about. So I'm gonna remember, do not forget looking at reality, meet people, diversification, listen to new voices, partnership, different perspectives, and equal representation. So I think it's the great agenda for the next 5 to 10 years for the sector. Thank you all for participating into this session. Hopefully, this is the first of many other conversations that we'll have on this topic. There are many projects around the world that are working on gender equality in the immersive technology sector. So other opportunities also to shed light to those people. So it's been great having you all. Just letting you know that if you want to know more about TRANSMIXR, you can follow us on social media and also subscribe to our newsletter, looking at our wonderful website that's been done by all the tech developers that are part of TRANSMIXR. Thank you to everyone. Sorry we didn't get to use all the questions, but I will make sure, if all of our speakers agree, to share their contact information so we can start a new conversation all together. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Talk to you soon.
Thank you.